in keeping with the open meeting law and the protocols for online meetings and things like that. So my name is Bruce Post. I'm chair of the State Library Board. I've been on for nearly 11 years.
Tom Frank, board member from Milton.
Linda Sarnioki, board member from Weston.
Maxie Ewens, board member, former director of the Shelburne, of the Fletcher Free Library, trustee of the Shelburne Public Library, and Northern Vermont.
James Saunders from Plainfield.
And I guess I'm the last person. Jason Broughton, State Librarian, Commissioner of Libraries at the Vermont Department of Libraries, resident of Barre City, technically, and also a person on the Barre City Public Art Committee.
There you go. And I neglected to say that I'm from Essex. So going on the agenda, what I'd like to do first, before we get to public to be heard for items not on the agenda, I would like Tom McMurdo to explain the online procedures today.
Good morning, everyone. In an effort to simulate an in-person meeting, chat is disabled for this meeting. During the times that the board calls for comment, like Bruce is about to do for public comment, please raise your hand and we will unmute you and enable your camera so that you can speak and be seen. If the board calls on you, I will unmute and enable your camera so that you can be seen and heard. And finally, when petitions are up, I will unmute and enable cameras for those people whose names are on the petition.
Okay. Any questions from the board members?
I think Deb just joined, did she not? Did I hear Deb?
Well, I don't know yet, but I hope it'll be soon. So at this point then, I would like to ask if there are any comments from the public to be heard on items not on the agenda. And if so, raise your hand, and Tom, or who's going to monitor that so I don't have to look for hands?
Staff will take care of that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be monitoring it.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but there are people on the phone. Is *9 the way to raise their hand on the phone?
*6.
That's how to mute and unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Is that also how to raise your hand?
Okay, and who was that commenting, please?
My name is Kansu. I'm a member of the public. Just to
Yeah,
I believe it is *9 if it's the same as
Okay.
Zoom.
We don't have a great way for people on the phone to raise their hands if you're not also in the session on your computer. So if you can refrain from interrupting, that would be great. But during times of public comment now, if you do have a comment, you are currently unmuted or have the ability to do that.
Okay.
You can.
So I see.
I would ask again, just to make sure everybody who is even joining, because we still have a few people joining where we were at in the agenda. So for those who are just coming on, and I think everybody has now at least been situated. Hello, my name is Jason Broughton. Oh, we have another person right there. We are asking at this moment if there are any persons who would like to discuss something that is not on the agenda from the public, and now is the time to be heard. For persons on the phone, it is a bit more of a unique situation. So unless you have something, we ask that you refrain from coming into view at this moment, unless, again, you want to talk about items not on this agenda.
I see Sherry has her hand up, or she just took it down.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say Deb's in the meeting now, but I see her video is up.
Yeah. Okay, Deb, can you hear us? You'll have to unmute.
I'm fine now, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, and Debbie, we asked all the board members to introduce themselves and tell us where they are from. So if you could do so, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, I'm Deb Granquist and I'm from Weston, Vermont.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm not aware of anybody else who wants to speak on issues not on the agenda. So I would entertain a motion to we tabled this hearing back on December 8th, and I'd entertain a motion to take it from the table and begin the public hearing on the Negro Brook petition.
So moved. Linda?
Second.
Okay, Linda moved, Maxie seconded, all in favor by signaling aye.
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 And it appears to be
Aye.
unanimous, so, yeah, and James, it appears to be unanimous, so we'll start the public hearing on the Negro Brook petition. The way I have designed it to go is I'd like to hear from the main petitioners, a refreshment of their case and any update. It's been a long time since we had the December 8th hearing, and I think we have about 15 minutes for that. Then I do want to turn to the state librarian and staff to have a chance to speak as well. So, and then we will have a discussion by the board, public questions, and then we can have a move to necessary to close the public hearing and take action on the petition. So who's here from the presenters? If you identify yourself, and the meeting is yours to make a presentation, comments, updates, whatever.
Great. I think we're all here. Good morning, everyone. I've been looking forward to having more time with you all. There have been updates, but
Could you
can I ask who's speaking?
Sure. My name's Evan Litwin. I realize there are people on the phone as well, so apologies. Alex Hazard is also here, and so is Dr. Elise Gayette, who's the researcher, and she can certainly give more of the background that was from the previous, if that's what you're also looking for. But I did want to just say quickly that the land that we're discussing today, before it was state land held in trust and funded by all Vermont taxpayers, is the unceded territory and traditional homeland of the Elnu Band of the Abenaki. And we are honored to have the support of the band's cultural representative and director of the Ottawi Project, Rich Holsha, in consultation with Chief Roger Longto Sheehan. And that letter should be on file with you now. And we look forward to the possibilities of expanded partnership beyond the future of renaming Negro Brook. Here in Burlington, many volunteers are preparing to celebrate our first official Juneteenth celebration this weekend. And so we hope lots of folks will come up, especially considering the great news that came out of Congress, making it an official federal holiday. And probably the most important update to share with you all is news that came out of Texas this week. A federal board gave unanimous approval to remove the word Negro from 16 different sites. The Texas legislature passed a bipartisan resolution last month urging the federal agency to approve removal. The Harris County Commissioner expressed excitement and said there's more work to be done with hundreds of sites remaining across the country. Texas lawmakers actually approved similar legislation back in 1991, but the federal board rejected it in 1998, citing not enough evidence of local support. When asked what new evidence changed the mind of the federal board, a member of that board said, the new evidence is that was 1998 and this is 2021. Another member added the change in public perception of the names and the tolerance or acceptance of living with them. All of those sites will now have new names, all named after Black people from Texan history. Negro Branch, for example, will now be called Ada Simon Creek after an award-winning writer and activist who was inducted into the Texas Women's Hall of Fame. There is nothing to suggest that those approved names have any connection to the land that those geographic sites occupy. So I think that's certainly telling for today's conversation. Certainly, there are updates that came out of Townsend very recently, which I'm also happy to address, but I do want to leave time for Alex and for Elise. It looks like we only have 15 minutes on the agenda, so I want to be respectful of that. And additionally, I guess that would be my biggest update, would be to talk about what's, what occurred in Townsend very, very recently. So Alex, if you had anything to say.
Can I just interrupt just for a second, please? I see
Oh, sure.
James Saunders, who's on our board, has his hand up. James, is that true?
Yes, it is absolutely true. I just want to let Mr. Litwin know how much I appreciate the information that he's added in terms of the updating, especially with regard to what's going on in Texas. I was just curious as to whether or not he also felt that the organization of the United Negro College Fund, should that be changed too, you think?
I don't see personally how that is relevant to my petition that we've put forth. We are certainly focused on putting a person's name to this, Brooke, and celebrating somebody who is deserving to have her story told. I believe the United Negro College Fund had to come out recently and issue statements in the past couple years as to why they weren't changing the name. And they're a widely respected organization that have the right to keep or change their name. What the United Negro College Fund is not is public land on a map that everyone has to physically interact with.
Okay. Thank you.
And also, if you raise your hand and had your question, please lower your hand. So, and then, Jason, do you have a quick comment? Because I'm going to be flexible on the time here for the presenters too. So, Jason, do you have a comment?
I have a question. Thank you. I want to make sure that the public and ourselves are aware, because we're actually finally being able to discuss the situation, and I think it will surprise a lot of people. Do the three of you still maintain that the word Negro is racist, offensive, and oppressive? Because the question related to the United Negro Fund is actually in relation to what you have provided in context to the department. That has come through yourself and Dr. Guyette and Alex Hazard saying that the word is racist, offensive, and oppressive. So it does have a calibration to that. Could you please explain the differences or the change?
Sure. I want to actually invite the any of our other folks who are part of our Alex or Elise to add to this, but this is a conversation that's happening all over the United States. We've had many conversations with folks who do not want to see that name anymore. Whether or not you agree that it is offensive or not does not detract from the desire to humanize the story that's associated with that name, rather than just refer to that space by a outdated racial term. So we believe that Susanna Toby Brooke is a fitting name, just as the Texas legislature and the federal board that this would eventually go to have agreed that it is offensive, and that times have changed in what folks again find acceptable. And I just don't see, if I think somebody said on the last meeting we had, if one person is offended, and we're not just talking about one person, why can't we just rename the brook to something that isn't offensive to anyone? And so I invite Alex if he wants to add anything, or Elise.
Thank you for the comments. I just want to make sure that the public is aware of that interesting commentary we have to navigate.
And can I just one thing, it's not a question. I also want to say why 15 minutes here? If you haven't been on the hearing before, we had an over-hour discussion in December 8th. So I thought it was appropriate, taking from the table, not to start with our staff who weren't able to present, but to have a refresher and an update from the petitioners. So there you go.
Yeah, and I just want to add before Alex and Elise jump in that we do want to talk to you today about what occurred in Townsend recently that informs the conversation. We're all aware of it. We were contacted by the reformer. I know you folks were, so we just want to have that as part of our conversation and update as well.
And next, who would like to speak from the presenters?
I would just like to add a quick note on Mr. Broughton's question. And that is that the U.S. Board of Geographic names have said and approved the removal of racially offensive terms like Negro. So this is coming from the federal government. Thank you.
Any more? Alex, do you have anything to say?
Yes. Excuse me, in response to Jason's question and also some updates about our petition. So this is Alex Hazard, one of the petitioners. Really briefly in response to your question, I think me personally, as a Black person, I do find the word Negro offensive, but would also echo everything that Evan has already offered around the complicated history of that term and how it's being used today. But otherwise, so the other update that I wanted to provide, and excuse me for looking up, I have my notes up here on my second monitor. But we just wanted to address some of the concerns that were offered around the history of the word Toby. And so I just wanted to provide a brief update about our research and what we found out about that. We reached out to several national and state level Black or African American organizations, including the National African American History Museum, the National Association of African American Studies, the Center for African American History at Northwestern University, the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And I received no response that was able to affirm the things that had been offered in the December meeting. Dr. Guyette also helped us do some more research about, around this term, and I reached out specifically to Kate McMahon. Sorry if I'm pronouncing her last name wrong, but she's a museum specialist at the National African American History Museum, and she provided us with the following statement. While the name originated during the period of enslavement, under this logic, really any European or anglicized name could be considered racist. As I'm sure you know, part of the quote unquote seasoning process for enslaved Africans was to strip them of their African name and give them a European one. Her name has a racial history behind it, to be sure, but Toby is no more racist than Susanna, in my opinion. And she closed by offering that she was a real Black person and that was her name. Dr. Guyette was also able, sorry, I see that Jason's hand is up. Would you like me to continue or do I wait?
No, I'd like you to continue, please, and then we can get to Jason.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Gale was also to get in touch with Meadow Dibble, who's the executive director of the Atlantic Black Box, regarding the name word Toby. And she also said that I have never heard the claim that the name Toby is construed as derogatory or offensive. I did some basic searching in Google, turned up nothing on the topic. The fact that the character Kunta Kinte rejected the name foisted on him by his enslaver does not imply, to my mind, that a woman who was born into that name would similarly reject it. If Susanna had come by the name Toby in a similar way as an imposition, unless she moved to change her last name, we cannot assume that she rejected it or found it offensive. And I do have some more updates, but I'm happy to take a pause on the Toby feedback.
Jason, did you have a comment or question?
Just a quick question, because I did put in a call to the spokesperson from the Museum of African American History in DC and has not received a reply back, and to countless other persons as well. I just want to make sure for the board, were those persons speaking on behalf of their organizations or themselves? Because that is a big distinction we want to make sure everybody's aware of. In the information that you've provided us, each person is personally speaking. Is that correct?
I don't know, Elise, maybe if you,
Yes,
yeah,
correct.
thank you.
Thank you. That definitely helps, because those organizations would have a different caliber of communication if it were to be other than individual. So for the board, make sure that we are all aware that each person that has provided information that is also public record that you've been provided per the petitioners, they are all speaking for themselves.
Okay. Now, Alex, or Evan or Elise, do you have, before I go on to you, I see James has a question. So, and we're going to have plenty of time, hopefully, for additional questions and for discussion. Jason and staff have comments to make. I have some things to present. So, and then we'll have more time. But James, I'll defer to you at this point.
I just wanted to tell Mr. Hazard that it's great meeting with him again with regard to this particular issue. Those organizations that you mentioned, the one, the Museum of African American, I forget the rest of it, art, but I think that's in, I didn't get that absolutely correct. And then some of the other organizations had Black. I was just curious as to whether or not there's and I got to be honest with you, Negro is a little bothersome to me. I was a kid that came up in the late 1960s with James Brown, Say It Loud and Black and I'm Proud. We wanted to ditch Negro just basically on that song itself, and then other organizations as well. But I'm wondering, is there a preference over as between Black and African American as to which is best to call us now?
I will offer. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying. I'm just sort of wondering. I really don't know the answer to that question. I'm just wondering. I think that your input would add to the conversation as to actually the entire conversation. But I'm just sort of curious because I actually heard some people say they don't like Black, and I've heard other people say they don't like African American, even. And I'm just sort of wondering: is there, in your mind at least, is there one that's better than the other? Are they equally good?
I mean, I'm happy to offer certainly that I think, like you said, that everybody kind of has their own sort of feelings around one or the other. Me personally, I prefer the term Black to African American, and I can offer that I prefer that term because I don't really have any understanding of my family's history. So I hesitate to claim the term African American because I don't know if that's where my family is from. But that's just my personal perspective. And as you said, folks have varying opinions about that. I don't know if that helps at all.
It helps a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So James, if you could lower your hand. I'm trying to, the online etiquette helps, and we'll go from there. Alex, Evan, or Elise, any more comments? Because this is your time right now.
I did have a few other things I wanted to add, if that's quite all right.
Sure.
So I just wanted to share an update. We held on April 26th a community meeting with folks in or around Townsend to discuss the petition, where folks were at, around the renaming process. And I did want to share some feedback that was offered in one of the affinity spaces for Black, Indigenous folks of color in that meeting. So there were three kind of key takeaways from that event. One, that folks in attendance wanted to see the name changed from Negro Brook and supported the changing to Susanna Toby Brook. And similar to kind of what I was talking about earlier with Toby, didn't find the word Toby offensive and didn't necessarily see a connection to the book roots in this instance. And also sharing that we don't really know what folks' names would have been if they had not been enslaved or descendants of slavery or victims of slavery. The second primary takeaway from that event was folks felt that if we're not renaming the brook after Black people, they'd rather it stay Negro Brook because, at that point, at least they have an idea of where they're going, and folks had offered that they would probably stay away from that place, sharing that they felt this name would help them make a safe determination not to go to Townsend State Park. And then finally, folks offered that they felt that it was important to not center the renaming around slavery or themes of slavery and white saviorhood. And I'm happy to offer some clarification around the term white saviorhood if folks aren't familiar.
Yeah, I was a little confused by that. What if you could explain what it means generally, and then give me some examples of names that would fit that category of referring to slavery or white saviorhood.
Sure, I guess. So white saviorhood being that we're centering Black stories around the impact that white folks had on them versus their own sort of resilience and excellence and accomplishments. So, you know, for this example, right, we're talking about Susanna Toby and her resilience living in and around Townsend, the amount of time that she was there, everything that she accomplished during the Revolutionary War period, you know, maintaining the home while James was out fighting the war, all of those things, you know, reclaiming her bounty lands, all of that stuff, versus I think we had some conversation around renaming the brook after some supposed Underground Railroad connections. And so not wanting to do that, right? Because that is centering a Black story, Black history around white folks kind of saving Black folks from slavery, if that makes sense.
Okay, I know at one point the Townsend Historical Society suggested Freedom Brook, which they grew back. I think, Mr. Litwin, you made a comment online that this was could be considered polite racism, but I also want to comment, you mentioned Texas. I looked at the names. I know Jenny Runyon may be on this call, the names in Texas, and I think there was one named Negro Hollow that was changed to Freedom Hollow. And with Juneteenth coming up on Saturday, I also know that another name for Juneteenth is also labeled Freedom Day. So I have a little difficulty with charges that the Townsend Historical Society were polite racists in saying freedom, and yet we see freedom used now in a new name in Texas and freedom associated with Juneteenth. So
I'm happy to respond to that because I think there's a misunderstanding of what my statement was. My statement was that we had a petition that we had already been working on for a substantial amount of time. People had already signed it from around Townsend and beyond. And we had focused and centered a story that was very powerful for everyone who had been shared with around Susanna. And instead of joining with us, they held an emergency meeting on July 3rd, the day before the holiday, and had a unanimous decision to create their own petition to object to our petition and to pursue renaming it Freedom Brook, which did not center the story of a powerful and tenacious Black woman, but rather centered a narrative of slavery or the escaping of slavery, and very specifically, Dr. Guyette gave evidence in December that there is no known historical connection to the Underground Railroad with that piece of land. And so if they are pursuing historical accuracy, which they continue to say, that would be historically inaccurate. And so that is why I said it was polite racism, not that the word freedom is racist in and of itself. And I hope that clarifies for you.
Well, what confused me, and I found it actually offensive, you were charging the individuals with racism, whether it's polite or impolite. I don't know if there's a better form of racism. It doesn't seem to me there is. And when you're trying to have a dialogue with people, that is not an information starter. It's not something that brings people together. It drives them apart. And it just makes me sad when that happened. And, you know, I have some friends in Townsend. I don't know any of the Historical Society members personally, but I do know they're committed to the history of that town and have done some tremendous work. So I thought that was a rather unneeded comment. You could have said it was historically inaccurate or historically inappropriate. I think that would have been a better way of putting it.
I respect your opinion on it. I still would call it polite racism. I do believe they've done good work there, and it is incredibly sad that the Townsend Historical Society has not worked with us, not communicated with us, not responded to comments, and they actually withdrew their petition, not because of my comments here, but because of comments from people in their own community who went to speak to them about it. That is my understanding. So I don't have any problem with the Historical Society. They were the very first organization I outreached to nearly 2 years ago. But I stand by my comments. And
Hold on, okay.
withdraw them.
Excuse me, as chair for a minute. Wait a minute, who's calling? Please identify yourself and why you are asking to speak.
If you can hear me, I'm sitting here listening.
And who?
I am waiting. This is Kermit Blackwood. I'm Kermit Blackwood. I am a black person who has lived in towns. I have been a full-time resident of Windham County since 1994. I'm 53 years old. I would really like to say something. I find a lot of this offensive, and some of it is the tone of voice. And I don't like this whole paradigm. So can we get to discussing more than the vindictive protectionism that I'm hearing and this vernacular about white supremacism and all that? I would like to talk about the community of Townsend and what we can do going forward.
Okay, is that your comment, please, sir? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Bruce, in management. I actually just muted him just then. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have time for some additional discussion, and I've gone to about 20 minutes on this discussion right now, and I really think it's important to turn to the state librarian at this point. He didn't get really much of a chance to talk the last time. We rely on the staff to work with petitioners to go over their petitions, provide technical details, to have discussions and things like that. And, there's an old saying I used to know, if you don't know jewels, trust your jeweler. And I say sometimes, if you don't know books, trust your librarians. And I trust our state librarian. And I'd like to turn now to Jason Broughton to provide perspective from the staff angle. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jason Broughton, State Librarian and Commissioner of Libraries, and today I have a very simple task. It is one that has been weighing on me since June of 2019. What my plan today is going to be is to discuss with you what conversations have occurred between myself, Alex Hazard, Evan Litwin, Lauren Wallace, who is now a librarian in Alaska, and Dr. Elise Guyette. Some of this will be a bit surprising to those who are in support of the petition or against the petition. I am not going to talk about the merits of what the conversations are. I really have 3 points at the end that I can actually say I'm very happy we are now here, so I can actually ask the board these 3 questions based upon what the petitioners asked of the state librarian in conversation. The entire conversation I'm about to lay out is no longer about Negro Brook. It is about a request that the petitioners have asked regarding the state librarian that goes into a simple, common stance. What is fair and what is considered on par with equality? You will see how this case will be laid out shortly. I first would like to start with a poem by James Baldwin. The precise role of the artist, which we all are in this life, is to illuminate the darkness, blaze roads through the vast forest, so that we will not, in all our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more human-dwelling place. In stating that, it is highly recognized that the petitioners are doing an admirable thing. This has been said from the start when Evan connected with Lauren at the time working with us for geographic naming, and also Sherry Yeager. We have always maintained that we are in support of helping the petitioners have a successful petition. I'm quite sure Peter Bergstrom might be on this call, and he is one of our most successful petitioners in the state since the inception of him submitting petitions to us. The role of the department is to assist both the board and the petitioners in having a successful petition. It is never where the board should have an unsexual petition, unless, of course, it is for a specific reason, a technicality, or as we have voted yes, it is pushed back down by the federal government to say do it again for some other purpose. So for all who are listening and watching, our role has always been to make sure that the petitioner is successful. Why is this the case? First and foremost, we ask and really demand that you come in to speak with us before you start a petition. When we connect with counsel within the state, with our AAG and the AG's office, it is important, or Secretary of State, to know that when a petition is in play, that's it. The wheels have now been put into motion, and with that, the petition only has 3 options, which again, very important information I need to give you up front. The board can take the petition and vote it up, and it continues moving forward. So what does forward mean? Our process works in parallel with the federal government. If things are not working on the state level, the federal government has the right to require, request, review, deny all of our actions and push the petition back down or accept it, and it moves on to a federal map. The second item, the board has the right to basically say we deny and stop the entire process, and the petitioners must start again. The third is to table, but that can only be done for so long until new or changing evidence makes the board then decide to vote it up or vote it down. Why is all of this important? I'm not going to take up a lot of time because I think discussion and debate needs to occur. I do have a timeline that I could show you, but I will go through a variety of points from the time we received this entire petition through conversation up until basically the present. I must say it has not been an easy conversation starting out, and it continues to be a very tough one for all of us, the good, the bad, and those who are also trying to figure this out. It's opinionated. Anything on society, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, and sex are hot button issues. With that, on a positive note, we are celebrating National Pride Month. So to all of the LGBTQIA, happy Pride Month. For those who are looking at Saturday, yes, it is about time that Juneteenth was acknowledged. I knew that as a child, but that also shows the inequity of education across our entire country, where people get to learn their own things. In looking at that, we should also know that Juneteenth is also known as Liberation Day. Some say Black Liberation Day. It's also known as, guess what, Emancipation Day, even though we had an Emancipation Proclamation officially. And last but not least, as so noted by both persons, Bruce Post and Evan Littman, it is also known as Freedom Day. I hope that you're able to celebrate that on Saturday as well. I plan to be in Burlington, and there's one other location that I'm not doing justice, but I'll remember it later. As we go forward, on July 11th, we received information about a petition being discussed regarding Negro Brook in Townsend. Edmund Lippman reached out to Niels Reinhardt at the Agency of Natural Resources with a request. They, not knowing how the entire item kind of occurred, days go by, I'm just kind of summarizing, though I have it detailed, that A&R sent it to Sherry Yeager and Lauren Wallace to look at and examine. At this point, on July 21st, a digital exclusive appeared from Hassan Manat, and he does what is called the Patriarch Show. And his show basically discussed racist history in the sense of here are the 50 racist names deemed by him, not by the public yet, in our country. What you should know is that Mr. Hassan is a comedian. And within that, that is just for what it is. From that, the petitioners let us know that they had watched this show and felt motivated and moved to do something here in Vermont. At the last update, sadly, Mr. Hassan has come under fire for how he has treated women on his show, and he is therefore no longer with that. That is an unfortunate update because the information he provided was quite humorous, but also a little out there. But that is to let you know and be noted. With this, in August, the petition of 2019 started to then move forward to the department itself. The petition arrived officially in our office in October of 2019. And October 30th, here is where it all starts. After review, the petition was deemed incomplete, so this is the first petition, and unable to stand legally due to challenges of not having a clear proposed name. Per the requirements of the federal government, you cannot replace a name unless you have another name. So on that, the petition was taken down. Evan Lippman requested to resubmit with a chosen name and signatures to support that. Additional comments. Evan Lippman wanted to develop a name after the fact regarding the family name Hussey, spelled S-S-E-Y or Z-Z-Y, either choice. Just remember the pronunciation is still Hussey. Several statements of support included in his petition stipulated that the name could not be used because it was a pejorative connotation. At this point, I want to stop and make sure I understand what the petitioners, Dr. Guyette, Alex Hazard, and Evan Lippman, do you still recognize that Hussey is a pejorative? I'm asking a question. I'd like for the...
Yes, I do. I do. This is Elise Guyette.
Thank you, Elise.
Everybody that I ask knows that that name is a pejorative. I've heard no one say it's not.
Perfect. That's what I needed. We still are hanging to that. You'll see why I asked this question in just a moment. The petition did not include, however, the original petition support from Townsend et al., nor appeared to have contact with the town regarding the petition. The board recommended that Evan Littman contact the town select board and garner town support. At this point, I will now make a comment. Again, this is just what has been discussed. It is not for good or for bad. Emotions can be high in such types of items, so I'm just laying out the case from my track record. November 1st, 2019, Evan Littman responds to the department and to the state librarian, Lauren Wallace, with some heated comments, not exactly threats, of action from several groups. Evan Littman says that he would get involved the following types of entities: UVM's PRISM Center. He is a founding member of the Burlington NAACP chapter. He would also involve all NAACP chapters in the state if he can do so, and he will have a coalition behind this petition. He also mentions that Kaya Morris will also be able to get behind this petition, and that information was then forwarded to the chair, Bruce Post, and also to the secretary of the board, myself. 11-4. Phone call from Charles Marchant, board member of the town's historical society, prominent citizen, did not know the petition had been submitted. Here is where I have never understood, and when I finish, I'd like the petitioners to address this, or if Charles Marchant is in the room, I'd like for you to address it. I don't understand what the communication breakdown was, because when we started this, you had some form of a relationship in which things were working, and then it all stopped. That has never been actually addressed or discussed for understanding, and I ask that you do so now. It doesn't mean that we need to get in heated arguments, but it's to understand you started off together, even if it was a little bit off kilter, and then it crumbled. Following that, getting back to my timeline, he attempted to work, Charles Marchant, with Evan Littman, but it did not exactly work out, and it just appeared they needed to go their separate ways. Stated the Historical Society, the town, and the Select Board would protest the petition and would protest it if the meeting were not held in Townsend, per Charlie Marchant. To Charlie Marchant, who I now see who is on, I do want to say one thing for the petitioners who might not have understood something. And again, the media can have a variety of things that some say are taken out of context. I'm going to put it to that statement. From one of you, it was noted that Charlie Marchant could be deemed a racist. And I want to say something about that personally. I've done some background on Charles Marchant through the Vermont Historical Society. And to my wonderful delight, I have to say something that I think you should be thanked for. Charles Marchant, in doing this level of work for years, one of his first acts was to find a burial site for an unknown person who was an African-American, American Revolutionary War person. He cleaned it, cleared it, found it, and named it. I must say personally, and I'm from the South where these things can occur, I don't know too many racists that would actually do that. So to that, Mr. Marchant, as we celebrate June 19th on Saturday, you have my humble gratitude in finding that burial plot. Sorry if I'm a bit emotional on that, because that's really beyond the curve of what anybody would have done to a forgotten voice in Vermont. Thank you, Mr. Marchant, for that. As we go forward, 11-7, I've asked Evan Littman to meet with me and discuss the meeting. 11:08, Edmund Littman refuses. 6:15, we're now in 2020. For some interesting conversations, Dr. Elise Guyette reaches out to Laura Trishnan, who is in the administration for the governor, and Susanna Davis, who is also in the administration with the governor, and she is our state's racial equity officer, regarding the petition to move forward. Susanna Davis connects with the state librarian and forwards the information to me about the discussion. In between, Susanna Davis and I have had discussions, and she said, "This is your realm. I will sit back and basically watch. This is not my jurisdiction. Please keep me abreast as possible as the racial equity officer, and then we can discuss as needed. If you need help from me, please let me know." As we then move forward, 6:18, we receive a lot of support from Curtis Reed, who is in the room today, and he is representing the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. 6:18, Jason Broughton is contacted by Derek Bauer for 7 days regarding race place names, and with that, Bruce Post is also contacted, and a conversation ensues. 6:23, received email from Charles Michonne reiterating the intent to protest and implies the intent to submit his own petition. One of the things that people should know, again, a pause for updates and information, one of the single most important acts the State Board of Libraries requests of all petitioners is to have a unifying petition. This response is based in the parallel process that we have with the federal government, with the USGS. What does that mean for anybody listening? If we have what can still continue, petition after petition, that is not unifying. This is why we ask people to go to the local community and garner support. But that's not all. It does not mean that the town has to give you that. It does get taken into account that you tried, you did, and the board will discuss that. That is what is always required. The federal government even says some participation from the local community has to be attempted and definitely, if all possible, pulled together into one unifying petition. I hope I've made that example very simple, because if you aren't careful, the board would then be seeing every year a name change because people dislike the name change the last group had. The federal government would simply shut us down. They do not like pathways that occur to that, and that would require a review process, which would mean something's wrong. So again, the key goal of anything that we do will always need to be come out of the community or connect with the community, but you need to have a unifying petition. Even if that means groups will say we will stand down and allow the petition to go forward. I will, though, however, like to make a comment that is very, very important. It is up to any individual to bring a petition. It is not appropriate for petitioners to tell or mandate or tell anyone else, stop your petition, unless there is a very valid reason, because they have the right to do so as an American and their First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Very important to remember. As we go forward, and I'm not going to keep it too long because this timeline is extremely long, but I'm just picking up the parts that I never got to kind of express for the public. The reason why this is so important is because a lot of things went into the news media and the department and myself never really had a chance to discuss this. We did have a few interviews, but it was not the way in which we were discussing or letting people know the thoughts. On June 23rd, 2020, the Townsend petition hears the petitioners, tables a discussion until receive response from the Historical Society. What does that mean? The Select Board constantly wanted to make sure that its body, the Townsend Historical Society, that they continually to ask for information from on such items. Please weigh in on the position. The Historical Society has chosen not to weigh in. They may do so in the future. At last count, yes, as of the latest Townsend meeting from the Select Board, they again were asked to weigh in, and Charles Michonne said that he would connect with them. We might hear an update about what that meant. As we go forward, on 6/23, Dr. Guyette makes a post to the link www.pjcvt, rename the Negro Book unto Susanna Tobey. 6/24, 7 days article comes out about geographic naming. 6/24, Charles Michonne, email confirmation to the Town Historical Society, will be submitting a petition on his own for the October board meeting. 6/25, WCAX puts out a story I have all the links. Again, for those who want public information, you will have this. This will all be provided to you. 629, Local 22/24, airs My Champlain Valley, talks about Vermonters band together to rename Negro Brook. Update, per Bruce, post, couple of qualifications. I did not say there would be a hearing later this year. I said, in fact, we need a petition. Then I said the earliest we could get it is to consider what it would look like in October. We only meet quarterly, usually. I also emphasize that I am not going to leave out the people of Townsend, per the chair. July 8th, 2020, article published in the Commons, interviewed by the state librarian and also Bruce Post and Evan Litwin. And I think Stephen Gillum also had comments within that one. 710. I'm stopping because here is where it's been difficult to understand from the petitioners who have the right to do this, why they have done this. And I would like a comment once I'm finished. It is your right to do this, what I discuss, but I would like to know why. On 710, a FOIA request was received by the department regarding its geographic naming procedures. That FOIA request was looking for what the petitioners felt was unfairness treatment in the naming process. Our geographic naming procedures are listed on our website and are all public comment, but that is the first FOIA request that we received. 714, the board meets with Evan Littman, Alex Hazard, Olu Peters from the Commons, Jesse Putman, Rebecca Chalmers, Scott Garvin, attended and posed questions regarding the board's internal procedures regarding geographic naming. 720, the state librarian reaches out to Evan Littman, Lee Skyett, Alex Hazard to request to meet with him as well as the Historical Society and potential other interested parties. Evan Littman refuses to meet with anyone outside the petition. July 23rd, we finally are able to meet. Thank goodness they agreed to a meeting. At the meeting, myself, Lauren Wallace, Evan Litwin, Elise Guyette, Alex Hazard, and the three specific points that were discussed were the naming choice that they had selected, sources of primary information, and questions that needed to go to a legal counsel for the department. That discussion was quite unique, and here is where my main case for us, for the board to discuss which way they would like to take this is based upon this original conversation. Elise Guyette provided a documentation that said the word hussy is a pejorative and should be taken off the table. It was reported to the three of them, along with Lauren Wallace and myself. That is a prerogative that can be considered. The state librarian said, I am in agreement with you that I do know that the word hussy, no matter how you spell it, H-U-S-S-E-Y, H-U-Z-Z-Y, H-U-Z-Z-E-Y, it's all a problem. But I did tell the petitioners, the state librarian is charged with making sure that any term or name that comes before the board is the correct and most usable name as it can be determined. So that also meant if the board wants to use hussy over what the petitioners request, the board has the right to do so. It also means we could have a conversation to say, how do we navigate this? We all agreed hussy was an issue and it would be told to the board. I'm telling you that now, finally. The second part meant if hussy was not going to be available, because the full name for our petitioner is Susanna Toby Hussey, we've taken off the hussy and now we're left with Toby. At that point, the state librarian said, hey, I have a little bit of history to kind of tell you, and Toby might be a problem in the same vein that hussy is. At that point, what was quite startling is that I was told I should not feel the way I should feel. And that was quite unique because the optics of this were not necessarily good. Why then can one part of the name under the petitioner's request be something the board should consider, while another part of the name, still a last name, is also in that, and under the same type of request, it is to be denied by the state librarian. So I'm asking for equality or clarification as to why hussy could be considered, but not Toby. Lots of comments have been going on saying Toby's not offensive, we didn't find a lot. I think you'll be surprised at what you find today, however, by the chair who will provide you with information. One good example, and I'm just going to let the cat out the bag, would be something that happened on Monday. In British Columbia, a court just allowed a prison official who was called by his supervisors a Toby lover $964,000. That term is still around. Whether you feel it's on page 100 of a web page link, all the way to the first link that you would find, I need to have an understanding of why hussy can be considered. Is it because Dr. Guyet's a woman? And is it also maybe because I'm a Black man that I feel more inclined to talk about Toby? Please help me understand the dynamics of that, as why am I not considered equal in my request when you say hussy is good to take off, but Toby is not? I understand, though, however, why that would be a fight. The federal government says you cannot have a first name. So yes, if Toby went, the whole petition has to start over. And that is something that we did discuss as petition, as you know, and I'm heartfelt sorry to tell you that, because I remember that day I had to tell you that. It was really hard for all of us. Because I said, oh my goodness, and Evan, I'll never forget it. You said, we've worked so hard for this. The only thing I hated telling you was that I wish you had come to us sooner before you had started the petition. Because from our legal counsel, Secretary of State's office, once the petition is in play, that is all that can be done is three things: vote up, down, table as long as you want, or stop it. There is a specific caveat that I have for Dr. Guyette that I need to make public. In meeting you for the first time through the virtual screen with Evan and Alex and Lauren there, we talked about you needing to turn over your materials to the department so that they could be reviewed and put into the queue for the board. All right. With that, a question was posed to you, Dr. Guyette, and that question was quite interesting. The question to you was, Dr. Guyette, could you please let us know when you'd like to turn over your sources to us so that we can begin the process of putting them into their proper procedures and for review? The question that you asked me, and I took this personal, and I'm saying this on the record, it has no merit for the board to consider, but it's just me. I've always wanted to ask you, why did you ask the question to me this way in front of my staff and Evan and Alex? What and who gives you the right to critique my work? I sat back, Lauren Wallace looked, I took a breath, and I then began to discuss my credentials and my degrees with you. I then discussed the credentials of Lauren Wallace and her degrees with you. I then discussed who April Shaw was. I also discussed with you who Tom McMurdo is and all the libraries on our staff, our librarians. I found that quite stunning that I would be asked, who gives me the right to critique your work? I understand you have a PhD, Dr. Guyette, and that is to be something to be honored and treasured. But I will never forget that question because my own staff literally wanted to have a conversation on that. I will never forget that. Onward as we go. With that,
may I speak at this moment?
I would not like you to do so at this moment. I would like for questions to be at the end. There's still quite a lot more.
Well, one of the things I want to give time to have a discussion and a reaction. And Jason, I know.
I'll wrap it up. As we go through July, we have a lot of conversations, again, with other meetings. 7/24, Lisa Guyette sends the research pensioners file and census data from Ancestry.com that she has to the department. In August 18th, we received a second petition, a new one, updated, sent and confirmed by Alex and Evan of receipt. We then submitted information to the USGS and USBGN for coordinates to begin the complete file conversation. 9/10/2020. Sent Hazard and Littman notice that no geographic naming petitions will be heard during the October 13th, 2020 board meeting. Also advised State Librarian will be proposing November 16th through the 20th for a special hearing to consider outstanding terms. 9/14, response received from Evan Littman to request to change the proposed special meeting times and request for an informal poll of state employees and board members regarding whether or not they would be amenable to a special meeting. 9:15 gave response, denied both requests. Logistically, this could not be done, cannot be heard earlier due to the 30-day notice requirement. Second, no private poll prior to the board meeting is possible, and is ill-advised that the board would not be discussing anything separately, but only do so publicly. That is the complete timeline up until our first meeting. There are a few things that have been very, very concerning for the department that are quite stunning in their requests. One of them is the second FOIA. The department continues to receive FOIA requests from Evan Litwin almost at the time it is about to make a comment. Each time this occurs, such as even this week, the third FOIA request was to the department on Monday, and that request was for the state librarian, the department, and the board members of this current board hearing this petition to turn over all and any information that they have had regarding Negro Brook. This is quite perplexing to the department because we simply already give you what we have. It is public record and public knowledge, but we seek to understand, why are we receiving FOIA requests when we have worked with you early on to give you as much support as possible? It is quite startling and it surprised us. So 3 FOIA requests right before myself or any of my staff have a chance to speak. Again, just for awareness for public, because we need to discuss this. Number 4, we received the information from Mr. Hazard with the following request. This was dated May 13th, 2021. We would appreciate it if you would please pass this following information on to Mr. Post for his consideration. In recognition of the many past and tributaries our conversation took during the December 8th hearing, we'd like to share some feedback for the board consideration ahead of the next hearing. Questions about Susanna Toby Hussing and the Brooks history appear to pop up and ranged. We recommend you consider submitting questions you have for Dr. Guyette in advance, which is odd for us, so that we can respond or she can respond to them either ahead of the hearing or during it. It appeared that some questions about her or her husband, as well as the Brooks history, may have been based on misinformation or misunderstanding. Having questions in advance for our historical expert would be prudent from the perspective and likely helpful for anyone attending from the public. Similarly, if the board has specific questions for us, it might be helpful to have them in advance so that we can ensure we are prepared to address them during the hearing. These are all problematic because they would go against open meeting laws, which the chair will actually discuss. The last items, as I clear out, on May 30th, Mr. Hazard, Mr. Lippman, and Dr. Guyette has talked about the letter from the Illinois, different types of items, but there's a specific piece that I need to read. On April 25th, 2021, the renamed Negro Brook Alliance, the Peace and Justice Center, and the Windham County NAACP held a community dialogue with approximately 20 people in attendance. The meeting was facilitated by trained facilitators and organized by Stephen Gillum. I should state, I know Stephen Gillum and have worked with him on different types of conversations in different rooms, and that's quite interesting for me. President of the Windham NAACP. During our meeting, we had a 30-minute affinity-based breakout session. Here are the notes from what we learned from BITALK affinity groups for their discussion. The folks in attendance wish to see the name changed from Negro and support changing the name to Susanna Toby Brook. They did not find the word Toby offensive and did not see the connection between the brook and the book roots. Also, they shared that we do not know the names of what these people would have been or what they would have actually wanted as they were enslaved. Total agreement. These are these people's names and we should move forward with that. Last but not least, the weirdest part of this comment. If we are not renaming the brook after Black people, people would rather it stay Negro Brook because that way they have an idea of where they are going and to stay away from this place. They shared they felt the name would help make it to be a safe determination not to visit Townsend or Townsend State Park. There is more, but we're not going to get to that. The last document is from Townsend. This is from the select board chair in writing about their conversation and the entire prospect. They discuss in it, just summarizing so I can move forward, the discussion about a body of water that confines the town for Townsend and the majority of which is contained within state property known as the Townsend State Park. While this issue has come up before the select board 6 times and the outcome of the previous 4 meetings was to support the Historical Society's position relative to this matter, as I understand it, the library board has that position, so there is no need to reiterate it here. The town select board agrees that the name change is in order. I also want to state that I am in agreement. As I've said to the 3 petitioners, yes, this is an admirable thing to do. The name should be updated, but what do we want to call it? And what can we do to have a unifying petition? The petition request change was signed by 314 people, at least one copy. I have 38 residents of this community signed that document. On average, there are 1,200 residents in the Townsend community, so approximately 0.4% of this board's constituency signed the document. Within that, the discussion talked about in 2021, the town is going to an Australian ballot and the reason for that and how it impacts this situation. And therefore, it says the responsibility of the select board of the town of Townsend is to its residents, voters, taxpayers, and constituency in their entirety, not just to a person or a group. This is clearly set up by the authors and founders of the state constitution. This issue has not been thoroughly vetted or explored within the community. The petitioners have not made significant efforts to inform the community and allow or open debate, but are asking the board to support this issue as is. Therefore, the Townsend Select Board has voted not to support the petitioners' efforts at this time. We will offer the petitioners the opportunity to present their request by bringing the matter to the residents of the town of Townsend in town meeting day, March 2022, which will allow the citizens to speak and be heard. After such debate and vote, the board will willingly to submit the results of the vote to the State Library Board for consideration. As I end, here are the 3 questions that I've always wanted to ask the board on behalf of the petitioners. Number 1, and this is important for the board, I'm finally being able to ask you this. The petitioners have provided us with a petition in which, by their request, the term hussy, no matter how it sounds, is to be removed off the table. Does the board wish to have that request honored or not? The board is charged with using the most appropriate name as per historical. You can accept the request or you can deny it. If the board does not choose to use that name, the board should discuss what type of standard it would like to have if it still wants to use the Susanna Toby name or choose some other name or process. If the board agrees that hussy should come off the table, the state librarian would like to know, just as he asked the 3 petitioners, please clarify so that the public and the state librarian is aware why hussy is able to be chosen as a last name and not reflected versus Toby.
Okay,
In
Jason.
closing,
Okay.
I want to say one piece. I've waited almost 2 years to say this. I simply want to know, these are these people's names. The charge that I have is to use the most accurate name possible. That has been conferred by the petitioners as well. So if the board so chooses to use the full name of this person is not Susanna Toby, it is Susanna Toby Hussey. If you choose to use Hussey, it is not on the petition, and the petition will need to be voted down. If you choose to have a different name, it is not on the petition, and the petition needs to be voted down. That is all the information I have, and those are my requests to the board.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. First of all, I said to Dr. Guyette, you'd have a comment, and so please go ahead.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Mr. Broughton, I am flabbergasted by what you just said about me. Was that meeting recorded?
That meeting was not, but my staff definitely warned me to do so. One thing I do want to add is,
Okay.
and Bruce, I'm going to bring to you, just for you, Dr. Guyette,
Yeah.
I told our chair that I was meeting with you prior, not just you, the 3 of you. And I thought nothing of it because I understood we would not have had to have this comment from me come to you so that you were aware of how I felt. Here's the weird part. When I said I was having a meeting with you and what I was going to say, I'm going to introduce Toby to them because they said hussy is also an issue. We just want to make sure we're on the same page. Bruce Post said the following to me, which is startling. I need to tell you something, Jason. I've come to know you a bit. As a white person, do not be surprised if they poo-poo you, if they tell you, I'm sorry how you feel. I brought my comment to you, not as a trap, just to say, oh, she understood hussy as a problem. She'll see that Toby is a problem. Instead, you told me exactly what he said, all three of you. I'm so sorry you feel that way. So I have to ask, why is hussy chosen one way and Toby not considered equally? And that is not to kill the petition. It's a standard that you put on the table.
Okay, Elise, do you have some more to say?
To say that I have always asked people to review my work. That is who I am. I want people to review and critique my work. I would never, ever in a million years ask Mr. Broughton who he was. I knew exactly who he was. I knew exactly that he should receive all of my research. I sent over 100 pages and I was always respectful to him. I am not a disrespectful person. I would never have said that. It's too bad that that wasn't recorded because it would show.
You do have witnesses. I do have Lauren.
Hold on. Up. Elise, please finish.
I'm just flabbergasted because I have never been accused of treating somebody with that kind of disrespect. And I certainly hold no disrespect for Mr. Broughton. I hold him in the highest regard, and I'm just totally flabbergasted by what you have accused me of doing. So I just have to say that, and it's so hard to prove a negative, but that didn't happen. I
respectfully take your comment, but I have witnesses.
I sent you 100 pages of research, and I'm very sorry that something I said obviously really touched you, and I'm sorry about that, but I don't know what it was. And because that's not me, that just is not me.
Okay.
We need to do some repeat. I'd just like to say that perhaps after all of this, we could meet and we need to do some repair because there's been a lot of misunderstanding and there's been a lot of personality clashes, and I'm just flummoxed really by the whole process. It's been a very difficult process for all of us.
Okay, and Alex, I may get to you later, okay? I want to have, first of all, something to say because Jason said a lot. I've talked to him over these many months. I know how he feels. I've not spoken to any of the petitioners outside this meeting because that would be ex parte communications, and I think it's my role to make decisions. So I was not part of those conversations. I want to crystallize something because I do think Jason makes an excellent point. If hussy is bad and can't be used because it's offensive to women, why is Toby good even though it's offensive and has been used as a pejorative about blacks? And in that regard, right now, if this, I've done some research. I know one of you said that somebody Googled Toby and found no evidence of it being a problem. I spent some time on this. I take the naming responsibility very seriously. And I was also affected by what Jason said about Toby. I mean, he warned me, Toby's a problem. And I said, why? I don't understand it. Quite frankly, I didn't find Hussey a problem because when I was a student at Norwich, one of our majors was named George Hussey. And so I knew it as a name. But okay, I'll admit that Dr. Guyette pointed out Hussey was a problem and a pejorative, unusable. I have the state librarian telling me that Toby is unusable. I have people saying they Google, they don't find anything. So I've tried to find some things because I think the issue comes down to not whether we change the name to Negro Brook or not. I think there's sufficient sentiment that's been expressed by this board to do so. I think some members of the board, I'm one, I've seen Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, and he uses Negro a lot. I understand why the emphasis changed over time, but I do want to present, if the staff can queue up the presentation I've put together on Toby as a racial slur. And can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
In the audience? Okay. So Mr. Litwin in his petition 1 mentioned he, through that vocative website or something where they had mapped racial slurs and geographic names. And I found that Toby was listed on the racial slur database as a reference to a character in Roots. If you go to the next page, please. And then this is from petition 1, do the little click, and I just want to emphasize, next slide, please. My Mac doesn't work with Teams, or else I'd do this myself. And this is what Elise said on October 11th in an email to Evan. Next slide, please. Again, petition 1, next slide. And again, their last name is not usable and now has negative connotations. So I can accept that. I can accept it's an important issue of discussion. And yet, interesting, last September, I had a guest at our house. She was downstairs speaking to my wife. They were both unmasked, and I'm a little nervous because of the pandemic to go down and partake of the conversation. But it was Sister Bernadette Boswick of the Green Mountain Monastery in Greensboro. They used to be in Weston. And Mary said, my wife said, Bruce, you got to come down and listen to Bernadette and her experience with Toby. So if you could go to the next slide and please play the sound file. Okay, Bernadette, who are you?
My name is Bernadette, and I'm co-founder of Green Mountain Monastery in Greensboro, Vermont. Yeah, that's who I am. I'm an artist, and
So what do you, when you heard about this proposal for a name Toby, what does Toby mean to you in your experience?
well, first of all, I rolled my eyes and I started to laugh because I thought, good grief, you know, don't they get it? Don't they get that Toby is kind of a slur? It's, you know, Negro would be just far better than to call some. Toby's more of a slur than even the word Negro. And the reason I know that is when I was about 14, I was on my way, no, 13. I was on my way down to on vacation with my parents down to Florida, and we stopped in Georgia to get gas, and there were 2 drinking fountains, and there was a line by the one, and I saw the other one was empty, and I wasn't paying attention. And I thought that, you know, I would just go to the other one, and everybody stopped drinking because I went to the one that said colored. And I didn't get it because where New York, New Jersey, we didn't have that. And all of a sudden everybody stopped, and the next thing my father was saying, get in the car, get in the car. And I was like, okay. And I ran over to our car. And as I was getting in the car, this woman yelled out at me and called me a Toby lover. And I thought, what is a Toby lover? Well, I didn't get it, neither did my parents, until we got down to my Uncle Bud, who is a doctor in Louisiana, and we were all talking, and I said, well, what's that? And then he explained to me that it was a slur. It was a name, was kind of like calling somebody a boy rather than a man, or, you know, it just had a connotation about it. And yeah, so I've known it for a long time that that's not a word you want to use.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
And just to date that was before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Burnett was 13 in 1963. So I started digging. I use newspapers.com. I've listed my sources here. This was an article in a paper in Lincoln, Nebraska. There was a black policeman named Derek Sherman, who was, I think, from Brooklyn, New York, went out there, and he began to complain about racial epithets and slurs thrown his way. And I've left out some of the details because I think they are pretty offensive words, and I know people are sensitive about that. But they did pass out several hundred T-shirts that said, "Come to Seward," the town of about 5,000 where he was a police officer. "Spend the 4th and the slammer, ask for Toby." And there was one instance of evidently a fight in the street. The tavern's emptied out. People surrounded them. Mr. Sherman was trying to break up the fight, and they said, "I can't see what my comment is here. Toby, I think they said something, "We're going to get you," and I blacked that out. So I kept digging, and next slide, please. In Cedar Rapids Gazette, there was a warehouse staffed by the Teamsters Union. An individual, a black individual there, named Mr. Daniels, I can't remember his first name, referred to the fact that he was called many things, including the name Toby, that the word Toby was scrawled on product boxes throughout the warehouse, and the steward of the plant drew a cartoon or cartoons depicting the split rail fence, a watermelon patch, a stick figure KKK, and words saying, "Move on, Toby." Please go to the next slide. Now, Jason did refer this. This is an article from 2019. An individual who was a corrections officer in the Canadian province of British Columbia was given a hard time by his supervisors. He eventually quit, and one of the slurs that was hurled his way was Toby. And bring up the next slide, and you could see what the tribunal judge had to say about the name Toby. Next slide, please. And earlier this year, the BC Human Rights Tribunal awarded compensatory damages or compensation to Mr. Levon Francis, the former corrections officer, of $964,197 in damages, in part because he was often called a Toby. And so I think this is important information. Next slide, please. This is from Britain to show that this is an international slur. This was a case, and again, I have some reference in there, and you'll get this chart if you want to follow it up, of a supervisor in a Domino's pizza store. Underneath, on the bottom of the box, he wrote some slur, put the pizza in, and then wrote Toby on the outside. He was eventually fired and fined 600 pounds. And he says, oh, he was just bantering back and forth. But that was not thought to be the case by the court. I think it was in Wales. Next slide, please. Now, this is very recent, May 18th. The small town in, I think it's in North Carolina, Hartford. I don't think it has many people, but during a council meeting, one of the councilmen called the mayor an Uncle Tom, and also called the mayor Toby. It's rather ironic he would call the mayor an Uncle Tom because she is a woman. And this is an editorial from that paper. Please, next slide. And again, this is what the paper said. And Jackson referred to Norman as Toby because he says Norman sometimes sides with the white folks on the council from time to time. Next slide, please. Okay, this is from petition 2. And I saw this comment. This is October 30th, 2019. The board expressed concerns about the name Hussy/Hussy, an offensive scribe to modern sexist connotations of the word. The board recommended we consider another individual. Well, I don't think most of the board even heard about this petition by October 30th. I think I had some discussion with staff about it, but the board certainly didn't make a finding that Hussy was offensive because of its sexual connotations. I don't know where that one. And then the next slide, please. This is a fundamental question. It's a fundamental question the board must ask. Is Toby, and is there enough history behind it, is Toby an offensive word? If hussy was considered offensive and unusable, I don't see why Toby should be given a pass, especially when out of his lived experience, the state librarian told me about how it was used when he was growing up. And so that's the fundamental question. And I know there are some hands up from the petitioners. And what I want to do is listen to them, open it up from some board discussion, and then the board, let's see, it's 11:30. We can take some comments from the public, but the board has to make a decision whether to end the hearing and then consider the petition, whether we should accept it as it is or take another position. But I would like to get some resolution on this. It's gone on for a long time. And I don't think going on for many more months will necessarily help the issue. So that's what I'd like to do. But I'm only one voice speaking, and I have some other voices here who can speak as well. But first, I want to hear from Alex, Evan, and Elise.
I can open, if that's all right. Elise, thanks.
No,
sorry.
Alex.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of address the larger question. I appreciate all the research that you all have done, and I guess I guess maybe this just happened in our breakdown of flow of communication. I guess it would have been nice to know all of the research that you all found, because like I said, I wasn't able to find all of the things that you all did, not for lack of searching, for whatever that's worth. So, and to address the question, I don't think that anybody on any of the petitioners or Dr. Guyette made any insinuations that, that Mr. Broughton's experiences were not as valuable as Elise's. I recall actually doing some intentional conversation about saying, that hasn't been my experience. I haven't known that experience, but I appreciate that that's your experience. I'd like to learn more about it. And we went off to do our research. Like I said, we weren't able to find anything when we were conducting our own research, and it was nice to hear what you all were able to find. And so thank you for sharing that additional information with us today.
Okay, Elise, you were next.
Yes, thank you. I want to go back to the meeting where Jason told us about the word Toby, and I certainly took to heart that he was bothered by that name. And I recall having a long conversation with him about, because the petition had gone so far, her name was spelled different ways. Then her name was also spelled T-O-B-E. So I asked Jason if the board could change the spelling and not have to start the whole process all over again. And I believe he came back to us later and said that, yes, that would be under the board's prerogative. If you just wanted to change a spelling, then you wouldn't have to, vote down the whole petition and have us start all over again. So that's my memory of that meeting. I was really trying to come to some kind of a compromise. And since her name is spelled in different ways, I felt that, well, perhaps the board can change the spelling of T-O-B-E, and so it would not be the insensitive word that you just helped us understand.
Okay, thank you. Evan?
Thank you. I just really want to echo Alex's statements as well as Elise, but, from the very beginning of the July 23rd conversation that was brought up, that's how I remember it as well. And certainly I remember personally acknowledging the experiences that Commissioner Broughton had. and the conversation that we had around that I thought was rich, and I thought we were all on a similar understanding. I recall the same thing that Elise just shared, and unfortunately, and I know Jason said how hard it was, you know, that the Attorney General said we really couldn't make changes to the petition again without throwing out the hundreds of signatures that were gathered, the many letters of support that had been mailed in at that point, including all the organizational letters. So it was starting from scratch again. And I did just want to share that we posed at the April meeting that Alex talked about, that was facilitated by the Fawn Gillum, president of the Windham County NAACP, and a colleague of his. We proposed that we were willing to withdraw our petition, and we offered our supporters and the folks that were there and say, we're doing this work on behalf of you all. And so if what you want us to do is withdraw this petition as the petitioners, we're happy to do that. And the Toby question was the number one question that we posed, because we honor the lived experience of Commissioner Broughton, and we have said that from the beginning.
Okay. That confuses me a little bit that you said you were willing to withdraw the petition, because I think after we consulted with the assistant AG, that the petition could not be withdrawn unless you contacted everybody that signed it, so that the only option we would have is to
vote it down.
To vote it up or down.
Sure, and that's my mistake. That's my mistake for not recalling that then,
okay.
and that is I don't recall that, and I appreciate there's been a lot of communications.
Okay, and in the sake of moving things along, I'd like to hear a little.
I'm so sorry, but there were some things that I really do need to address from the very lengthy list of questions and comments that were shared by Commissioner Broughton that we were not able to respond to, and some of them I believe to be fairly misrepresentational of things I've said and done. And I also did pull up the email, Chairman, that you are not recalling, that Lauren Wallace, who again is now in Alaska, said that she had spoken with you in the Hussey issue, and she documents sort of, and so my understanding was that came from you.
Yeah, but I just want to say for the record, I don't think I've ever communicated with you directly or any of the petitioners, right?
No, you were copied on that email though.
Okay, now we're here today. Okay, we're here today. And I think the central issue, I want to boil it down right now, is not whether we should keep the name Negro Brook. I think I've heard some sentiment on the board that they understand that changing times have put another slant on that word. Although, you know, when I listen to that I Have a Dream speech and I hear it out of the mouth of Martin Luther King, it makes an impression on me. But that's my point of view. But we do have an issue on whether the name Susanna Toby should be used, not only whether it's considered a slur, but whether it really is historically significant. Because one of the tests we have that we ask feds is that when you're changing a name, there should be compelling reason to do so. And I think you might make the case that the fact that it's Negro Brook is compelling enough. So I would like to, I know Witchy's got a question, but this is a board meeting. I would like to hear if the board has any comments or questions at this point in the course of hearing, and then I can get beyond that, I can get to comments from the audience, and then we have to make a decision. We can table again, which I don't want to do personally, and we can make a decision. And I'll just have some comments later because I just don't like the way it's gone. I've said in the beginning, it's easy to change a name. It's hard to change hearts. You know, and I saw the information that Dr. Guyett sent to me last night at about 10:15, but I was aware of the Washington Post story on what Texas did. And okay, here's some comment I make about that. Yes, they changed names. Then they went out and created some of the most difficult voting procedures in the country, which I think is meant to disenfranchise blacks. And then yesterday, the governor goes out surrounded by Texas lawmakers saying he's going to spend $250 million in state funds to build the wall. Now, I would hope we get to a point where we stop that kind of a stuff, and we're changing a name is not evidence that we're bringing about racial justice. More has to be done. We can deal with the name, and I want to deal with the name, and I want to hear now from the board. So,
Okay,
board members,
Tom
if
here.
you have any questions, yep.
Yeah, Tom here. Okay. One thing, I talked to my neighbor when I grew up in South Jersey. All my neighbors, at least the ones that I played with, were black. I was the token white guy in the group. And I called Earl, who was a history teacher in high school, and I asked him what's his opinion on the term Negro. And he said, if you ask 100 black guys, you'll get 50 different opinions. So, and somebody did say in this, if one person is offended, you should change it. Well, I know one person that's offended by the term Toby. Now, Hussey, if you can change the name Toby, the spelling to T-O-B-E, because spellings are all over. I just Googled it here, and Hussey, according to Google, is spelled H-U-S-S-Y. And you can pronounce, who knows how they actually pronounced it back then, H-U-Z-Z-E-Y or whatever, and pronounce it Hussey. The question is, when did she get married? Are we and I think her husband's name was James. Did he live in town? And are you saying that, let's say they got married when she was 16, 20. So 16 years of her life, she went by Susanna Toby, and then 80 some years she went by Susanna Toby Hussey. And she probably didn't use Toby at all. So that would be a way to really honor the person as she lived in the town. And if people are offended, then you do education. That's what state parks are for, to educate. And you can say this was it, and then you can do the history of her and James, her husband's Revolutionary War, and his history. If that's what you're wanting to do, that was her name. And I have no problem that changed Negro to a person's name. And that's what I have to say about that.
Any other board members that want to make a comment or ask a question? Maxie, I see you raising your hand. You have to unmute, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm really sorry that this has become so adversarial and contentious. I think we all want the same. I too feel that Negro Brook is not appropriate anymore. I have some real concerns that I share with Jason about the process of all of this. So I'm just, as a board member, I don't know what to say more. I was also curious about the meeting that the Townsend meeting that you mentioned. There were 20 members at that meeting. The town of Townsend has what, 1,200 people in it.
Now, let me just interrupt for a second. I didn't hear Evan say Townsend, but Evan, weren't you referring to the meeting through the Peace and Justice Center and the Wyndham chapter NAACP that you held online?
I was, yes, and not everyone at that meeting was from Townsend. Certainly, most everyone was from the area, Jamaica, Dummerston, and surrounding towns. And I appreciate the question. The other piece is that 36 residents of Townsend, I believe, I may have the number slightly off, signed the petition and have received regular communication from us.
Okay. Linda has got a question. And Maxie, I'm sorry if I interrupted you. Please finish.
So I just want to know, there's going to be a meeting next March where does Townsend have the jurisdiction over naming the brook?
No, let me clarify that. The feds do ask us and ask petitioners to see about local support. Living in a place and having experience with names in a place is a very important thing. You live with it every day. And so the feds have encouraged us to do that. Townsend doesn't necessarily have a veto over the name. I think I listened to the hearing the other day. Townsend, though, wants to have put it to a question of the people. Now,
Bruce, the select board chair is here for awareness. The select board chair let me know he'd be coming, and Mr. Scott Garvin from Townsend, the select board chair, is in our audience and can answer any questions you would like if he desires to choose. My last points are, again, yes, a lot of things that the petitioners have said we are in full agreement with. The only three things I need clarified are why are we choosing one or the other, what's the process, and what would the board like to do? Those are the three things that I've always wanted to say. And again, through encouragement, they are doing a wonderful, admirable thing from the get-go. And they know that. The situation personally with me, though, with a comment, is not how I took it. It's exactly as what was said per people in that conversation. And I will end it there.
Okay, now I'd like to get some comments. Unless there are any, if there are no board comments, I'd like to get some comments from, okay, Linda, excuse me, and Deb, excuse me. And then I'll try to get to Wiki, or I don't know how to pronounce that name. I think you've been on for a while with your hand up. So Linda, then Deb.
I have a short question, and then I have a comment to make, if that's okay. My question is, I thought someone referred to.
I can't raise my hand, but I would also like to make a comment. I'm only on the phone.
You get a chance.
So my question is it possible? I thought someone said that you couldn't have a first name on a naming thing. Is that right? So it can't be Susanna Toby. It has to be Toby. It can't be Susanna Hussey. It has to be Hussey. Is that right, or did I misunderstand?
No, I don't think it's right. I think what we've heard, and if Jenny Runyon's still on, you can't have a first name alone. You could have, as they did in Texas,
you can have a last name.
Have a first name and a last name, or just a last name. So that's that. And you had another point to make.
Right, and I just wanted to say that I agree with Maxie that I think it's too bad this has become such a fraught discussion, and it seems to me that there are a fair number of extraneous. And I don't mean that in an insulting way at all. I think there's some extraneous issues here having to do with sensitivities to particular comments and what was said and what wasn't said. I think that's frankly irrelevant. We have a couple of questions to decide. One is, are we going to change the name from Negro Brook? And I think there's general consensus it should not be Negro Brook. So then the next question is, what does it get named as? And the question of the appropriateness of the petition then becomes relevant. Is the petition process, is the petition itself valid? And therefore, if we accept the petition, then we have to decide if we decide on it. We have to decide whether we want to change it to Susanna Toby. I think otherwise we reject the petition, we defeat the petition because it hasn't been appropriately brought before us, or hasn't done its research, whatever. But I think I think those are the questions here, and what happened at what meeting is frankly not important to me at this point.
Now, pardon me for allowing somebody to jump the queue. And Deb, if you'll allow me to do it, I see Jenny Runyon has her hand up, who's our liaison with USGS and was quoted, I think, in that Washington Post article that the difference today is that it's 2021. And she is a technical expert on this, and she can correct me or add things that'll be helpful. Thanks, Jenny. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you to the Vermont Board of Libraries. I appreciate being included here today. Yes, to clarify from the U.S. Board on Geographic Names perspective, it's certainly true. We have a long names policy that has discouraged the use of first and last names. If you think, we don't have, Henry Hudson Bay. We don't have Zebulon Pikes Peak. We just simply have the surname. The idea being that a map would get awfully cluttered if every commemorative name included both first and last names. Having said that, there are many, many exceptions. We've gotten many proposals, both for first names or last names. If the individual was always known locally by their first name, or if maybe they had a common surname, Smith, and they wanted to differentiate by using the first name only, that's perfectly fine. Again, the surname is perfectly fine. And a combination of the two is perfectly fine. Ideally, yes, we discourage that. Again, as I said, not to clutter the map, but in a case like this, where if the words Toby or Hussey are considered of concern by including her first name, I would argue, and again, this is my sort of personal opinion, or maybe speaking for the BGN, I think there'd be perfect valid argument to use both the first and last name. And yes, obviously there can be the debate as to whether you want to use her maiden name, the name she had for the first couple of decades of her life, or the name that she acquired through marriage. I think the important question is, are you in fact attempting to honor just Susanna or Susanna and James? If that was the case, then maybe Hussey or Hussey would be more appropriate. But if the goal here is to honor Susanna, particularly for her contribution to the town and her longevity and her association with the stream and or the area or the state, then certainly, her name. We don't know whether she would have preferred Hussey or Toby. She's not here to ask.
Okay.
As far as I know, I don't know if there are any descendants of hers who might have an opinion. But I don't think our board would have any real heartburn over the use of the first and last name in a case like this, especially. And Bruce, you're absolutely right. In the case of the recent Texas decisions, 14 of the 16 names that were approved were both first and last names. The board approved them without a whole lot of discussion. So again, it's a long explanation, but I would suggest that you not be hung up on the first versus last name versus both names. You need to focus on, one, should the name be changed? And two, what is the best replacement? And I don't think anyone looking at a map seeing Susanna Toby Brook or Susanna Hussey Brook, personally, I don't think our board would see that as being offensive. Maybe the surname only, if you didn't know the story, but seeing Susanna, it's an obvious person's name. So anyway, for what it's worth, again, just wrap up, Susanna Hussey was listed under that name in the 1840 and 1850 censuses of Windham County. I found no record of her being listed as Toby. Now, there were several Toby landowners in 1810 in the census. Two of them particularly owned slaves. So it's quite possible that that's how she acquired her name. But of course, it's pure speculation. We don't know if she was one of those enslaved persons or not, but it's possible she did acquire her name from a white landowner. If that in itself is offensive, then yes, that's a factor. But again, don't let the first last name issue be the deciding factor here. So thank you again for the time.
Thank you. What's that picture behind you? Is that Wales?
No, it's Cornwall, England, where I was born.
Cornwall, England. That's right. I keep on mistaking you for somebody who was Welsh. And no. to an English person, maybe that's offensive. But go. Deb, you've got a comment.
I too would like to reiterate how saddened I am to hear how contentious this matter has become over time. I've been on the board for 2 terms, and we've done numerous geographic naming petitions, and this is the first one that just has been really difficult for everybody, and that saddens me. I feel like I was I just poured over with information today that I was not aware of before, and so coming to a decision is hard for me. But I'm struck by something that I believe Mr. Litwin said early on, which was that if one person has been offended, then the name should be changed. And I'm curious then, I apologize for the phone ringing. I'm curious then to hear from the petitioners. I don't care if I hear from all of them or one of them, as to why they still think if somebody doesn't like the name Toby, that we should approve the name Toby. I mean, you guys didn't like the name Hussey, and so you withdrew that name. And so we have people that don't like the name Toby. So I'd like to hear is why we should not consider that one offending vote.
Evan?
Thank you. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I reiterate our concern for intentional conversation around these issues and our deep commitment to what we have believed from the very beginning was a very inclusive practice of outreach and community building. We've been very involved in Windham County from afar, and that's more than I can say for some of the bodies that we've spoken about today, specifically. Well, I won't go into specifics. So to answer your questions directly, you know, the email that was sent to us on October 30th of 2019 from Lauren Wallace, who we all know and love, said the choice of Hussey for a name. You have several statements included in your petition from Elise Gayette stating the name cannot be used as it has a negative and sexist connotation. So she has thought about that. And it goes on to say, we do not want to substitute one controversial name for another. The board recommends you consider another individual with historic importance to Vermont. There were several other individuals identified in letters of support that may be great options to consider. The chairman also recommends considering Daisy Turner, who did not necessarily live along the brook in question, but did live one town over in Grafton. So what I'm trying to say here is that this was we changed it to Toby to try to preserve Susanna's story without throwing her out, and also work with Charlie Marchant and the Historical Society to focus on somebody who was from Townsend and on their critique of historical accuracy. We thought that this was the best avenue to pursue to make everyone happy. And that is why we proposed that.
Okay. I just want to be mindful of the time. And I'm especially concerned about the time for the board members. We've now spent, including last October, about 3 hours on this. I see we have 4 people that want to speak, but I'm not going to have this meeting go on much longer. And I don't know if the board wants to table again or to make a decision one way or another. And so Linda's got a hand up. I'd like to know from my board members how long you can remain in this meeting. I certainly don't want to go past 12:30 if it's possible for you to stay in it. How's the board feel?
Tom, I have no time limit.
Okay. Debbie?
Can't hear you.
I can't hear you. It's okay. Put your thumb up. Is that okay to go a little longer?
I'm sorry, 12:30 works for me.
Okay, Maxie,
Yes.
okay, and Linda. And Linda, you have a comment, don't you?
No, I am sorry. I just left my hand up accidentally. I didn't follow
Oh.
protocol. I apologize. 12:30 is fine with me. I would like to hear from the people who have brief comments.
Okay, so
We have James too, right? James?
I don't know if James has got any comments.
Yes, just thank you.
Okay.
12:30 is fine for me too.
Okay, thank you, James. So I don't know how to pronounce Wichie, but you've had your hand up for a long time. And so why don't you make a comment?
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for having this conversation and for including public comment, considering that we've talked a lot about process. So I love that we're being included in the process. I wear a lot of hats. I'm on the Vermont Racial Equity Task Force. I am part of, I'm a community organizer with the Root Social Justice Center. But today I'm wearing two hats, and that is as the second vice president of the NAACP in Windham County. And I am a resident of Athens, Vermont, which resides right between Townsend and Grafton. And that's going to be important because Townsend is where I go to the grocery store, where I go for the farmer's market. So I feel this is very personal to me. First, I want to allude to something that Commissioner, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, brought in. Oh, also, I'm sorry. My name is Wichie Artu, pronouncing him, his, they, them, theirs. I'm sorry that I didn't say that first. But I want to allude to something that Commissioner Broughton said that, about, Happy Pride Month. And I want to talk about Pride real quick because this is relevant. Part of queer liberation.
Please go. Whoever's interfering, please stop. Is it Wichie or Wiki?
My name is Wichie.
Wichie, go ahead.
Thank you. Not the first time I've been interrupted when I'm talking about social justice in a meeting like this. Okay, so I want to talk real quick about queer liberation, what pride actually means. Pride is about being visible. It's about being here. And Bruce, you alluded to that about this is our brook. We see it every day. This is where we go and hike. And largely in Vermont, Black history has been erased. When you look at all the streets in Vermont, they're named after white folks, or for the most part. We look around and there's so many names, and there's not the names of Black folks here. And actually, it's been actively erased by white folks, like we've seen in the Brattleboro Civil War Memorial. So when we talk about, Bruce, and when we talk about, well, why not name it freedom? And why is that possibly racist? It's because we need to make sure that we consider that when we name things, we have traditionally named things here in Vermont after people's names, and it's never been Black people's names. And I want to just make a reference, to the fact that folks of color are not a monolith, right? We don't all think the same, to Tom's point of the 50 Black folks will say different answers for the thing. Because we're not a monolith, right? But I think something that is important is that BIPOC folks here in Windham County have had their say, have been involved in the process, and that is thank you to this group. And I see, and in talking about process, what's been really difficult, especially living here in this county, is that when we talk about renaming this thing in this one town, well, let's leave it up to that town. Folks around that town are also affected by it. Right, people are gonna coming to live to help build a community, to help build a diverse community, is impacted by the actions and the visibility that exists here for us. And I want to just re-emphasize that it's not only a person of color, it's a woman of color, and I want to remind us that there have been a good amount of women of color in our county and in southern Vermont that have been forced out of official positions because of racism here. And I appreciate, I think it was Jennifer's point about being able to put the first and last name. I think that's a great option if we don't have to redo the petition. I think a lot of us are we want this to push forward. The BIPOC community here have said we want this to push forward. We understand that there is a concern and we want to, address the concern. It seems like we have a viable option for that concern, but I think in general, what we don't want is to do all of this all over. And I think everyone here in this room feels the same way.
Okay, thank you. Next, I see Laura Chapman. Laura?
Ah, sorry.
How can I get in the queue?
Myself.
And is that somebody on the phone who wants to be in the queue?
Yes,
And your name, please?
Kermit Blackwood.
Okay, you spoke before. I'll write down, we've got Laura, Hanshu, I think Cindy, and then you, okay? Is that all right? Yeah, and then I want to go to the board so we can move on. So go ahead, Laura.
Hi, thank you. My name is Laura Chapman, she, her, and I am third VP of NAACP of Windham County. And I just have a couple of clarifying questions. So around the naming process, would it be okay to do first name, last initial is one of my questions, and maybe that would mitigate a lot of the concerns. Although I would like to push back and say, you know, with a state park and education, a first name, full last name takes it out of the context of it possibly being a slur and addresses it as a name. And there are plenty of people walking around with names that are slurs that, you know, we don't make fun of, hopefully we don't make fun of them, and it's not an issue for them. So that's one question. And then another question is more for the select board, but should this process be tabled or unsuccessful, which I'm hoping it's not going to be, why wait until March? Why can't you do a special information session and meeting before then and work with the petitioners to get this before the town sooner? March is a real long ways away.
Okay, there
has momentum.
Cindy, if you don't mind, I see that Sherwood Lake has raised his hand, and he evidently is identified on the Townsend Select Board. So with your permission, I'd like to have him answer that question.
Sure.
Okay, Sherwood Lake.
There we go. I think I'm on. Good morning, everyone. The reason that that town meeting day was selected by the board was that it takes time, it takes money, it takes quite a bit of energy and effort to put forward a special town meeting. The only meeting that we have scheduled for these types of things would be town meeting. I think one of the things that has been missed here is that the opportunity to present this, if I've got my math right or the information right, this whole thing started in October of 2019. If this was an issue that needed to be brought forward before, next March, it should have been addressed at this town meeting, the one that happened in 2020. There was ample opportunity for the petitioners or anybody else that wanted to speak on the issue. I think one of the things that I addressed at one point, and I'm not sure that it was actually in the letter, but the town of Townsend put on 3 separate pre-town meetings via Zoom. 3 separate ones to make sure that every issue that needed to be discussed was added to the agenda to be discussed. That people got the information because they wouldn't have the opportunity that they normally would have for a floor vote. Town meeting in Townsend is basically run from the floor in most situations, and the floor vote, obviously due to COVID, could not take place. I'd like to add just one more thing, and I hope that answered the question. The people around here in this town rely on the select board to carry all kinds of business. We are representative of them, and I'm sorry, but 0.04% of the town's constituency, the select board's constituency does not make a majority. And all of these things, I have not seen where the petitioners have made an effort to talk to the people in town. No meetings occurred in town. The board wasn't involved in anything except for reviews from the Historical Society. And I think if we're talking about being inclusive, including that gentleman that spoke earlier that said he was from Townsend and he identified as an African descent or African American, his voice wasn't heard either. So I guess that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lake.
You're welcome.
Now, Laura, is that enough? Because I've got 3 other people that want to say things. I don't like to limit the amount of time, but we're running out of time. And I think
I really want to allow those people to speak. And I want to say too that it's pretty common. It is.
Laura, I think we lost you.
We lost you.
Laura, if you can hear us, we're sorry. You seem to have disappeared and we might need to move on. Thank you.
Hi. Real quick,
Yes.
Special meetings are not that difficult to pull off. I was a select board chair. It is doable. So I really ask you to search in your heart what the barriers are.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you. I've got Hanshu next.
Hanshu, if you are
I believe
speaking.
Cindy was for me. Can you hear me?
Well, I had a list here, and you were before Cindy.
If I could just hop in here, Bruce, it takes me a second to find the name and then make them a presenter. So that's why you're having a delay. So it takes about 30 seconds to bring people on.
Okay, so Hanshu, if we have you on, then I'll go to Cindy, and then I will go to Kermit. And then I think I'm going to ask the board what it wants to do. So go ahead, Hanshu.
Hi, thank you. I'm using my phone as my audio. Just a couple of things. I have heard and seen just today that this process has been less than kind to all of the Black people involved. So I just want to keep that in mind. I do appreciate what I believe it was Tom Frank said about the state parks being a place of education, that maybe there is a thing that we could do about scripting a proper plaque that would do some explanation of names. And then to Mr. Broughton, I hear you about the name Toby. I know of a Nigerian American rapper whose name is Tobechukwu Nwigwe, and I wonder if the spelling of who has shortened it to Toby, the spelling Tobe. And I do wonder if that harkens back to a possibility that her name was never from originally a slave owner, but maybe a shortening of an original name, as happened to immigrants. Not to say that Black people who were brought here were immigrants, because we weren't, didn't ask to come here. So I think to that point that maybe those things could be in. And in terms of Huzzy not being on the table, I really think that that choice wasn't necessarily a good one, and that it was based in a puritanical understanding of words. That's just oh no, says Huzzy. That was somebody's name.
Okay.
Check. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cindy, and then Kermit. We're at 12:15. I'll give you each a short period of time, and then I am not going to take any more comments. So I think it was, Cindy's coming up, correct?
Yeah, Cindy has the power to unmute and turn her camera on.
I've unmuted and I'm turning my camera on, but I'd like to give my time to Kermit in case it runs out first.
Well, I don't have a clock on you, but I do have an internal clock here.
Well,
so.
I'll hurry then. I just personally was thinking that I was really listening to what Wiki said, and I feel how important is it that the Select Board of Townsend be involved in this, because there are many community members such as myself who are about 1,000 feet from Townsend, but not in Townsend, who are very concerned about this as well. And since it's a state park, doesn't just having Townsend weigh in on this inhibit the idea of community that evolves and extends beyond town boundaries. So I wanted to say that. And also just, we have a friend who has visited frequently who is Black, and Mark has recently become afraid to go to rural areas because of how uncomfortable he feels, even in Vermont, which is sort of progressive. You know, when we take a walk, we will see a Confederate flag. So I wanted to say that renaming this brook, I think, is really important and needs to happen more quickly than waiting till Townsend's town meeting. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And
Thank
now, you're welcome. And Kermit, please, on the phone.
Please unmute if you can hear us. We cannot hear you if you've already started. We're going to ask for you to, there you go. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kermit Blackwood. I've lived in Wyndham full-time since 1994. I'm 53 years old and I am Black. There's an ancient Egyptian proverb that no discussion can throw light if it wanders from the real point. And what I've seen are a number of sort of bad arguments that we waste a great deal of energy on. And the purpose of our debate, what is it? It's progress. I am curious how many individuals listening to this now, and especially those that are involved in making decisions, have actually read the book written by the Townsend Historical Society called A Stitch in Time. Very quickly, I'm going to just read a synopsis. Hundreds of photographs, A Stitch in Time, Townsend, Vermont, 1753 to 2003, is the first full-length history of Townsend, Vermont. The book tells the story of the town from its beginnings on the New England colonial frontier, the celebration of the 250th year since its charter from King George II. The title, A Stitch in Time, is inspired by old patchwork quilts made up of a multitude of pieces of different colors, shapes, and styles, pieces from different sources, each piece with its own meaning, all carefully stitched together to make a coherent, useful, pleasing whole. The book, like a patchwork quilt, stitches together a wealth of historical documentation to portray the life of the town over the 250 years of its existence. It presents more than 200 photographs to illuminate the historical research drawn from town reports, census data, memoirs, farm records, genealogies, interviews, and other sources. For a town whose population has never attained 2,000, Townsend has been the home of a disproportionate number of remarkable persons who played roles in the larger history of this country. Notable amongst these are Alphonso Taft and his family, and Clarina Howard Nichols, champion of women and children's rights. I believe that it would be wonderful to see an abridged version of that book that includes more history, that's more inclusive. But I am personally offended by any notion that the town of Townsend is inherently racist by wanting to call the brook Freedom or whatever. I think that this whole thing is a little bit ridiculous. Negro Brook, I do not personally find offensive. In fact, it makes me a little happy that someone acknowledged that one of us was here. Now we can dig in and figure out who that was. Nobody's even discussed the actual brothers who had the logging outfit down there that this is even in reference to. I think the name of the brook should be Empathy Brook. And so everyone can think about what this means to them and not put white guilt onto people or get into this vindictive protectionism, because this is about inclusiveness and bringing our community together, not dragging the whole country's BS into our small, tightly knit community. And one last thing, and I will shut up. I'm particularly pissed off as a Black person whenever this social justice warrioring goes around. Those of us that live here, that go into the feed store, that go into the store, that are clearly Black, that can't take it off, we have to deal with the guy who's, you know, really been just slapped upside the head with a bunch of stuff he never even thought about. Nobody's guilty. Let's work together to educate all of Vermont about who we really are.
Thank you, Kermit. And now I'm going to close off comments. In just a second or two, I'm going to ask the board what its pleasure is. I do want to say, I want to add this because this is something I found deeply hurting, and I don't think it brings people together. In the January issue of the Commons by Olga Peters, an article on our December 8th hearing, charges were made about the board that there was an ongoing pattern of misogynistic behavior, which is rooted in unconscious bias against those who support our efforts, our research, and Susanna Toby herself. Our hearing was a mess. Board members had weaponized inclusion. The Negro Brook petition has been treated differently than other renaming petitions. One reason it's treated differently is because they're changing an existing name, but we've had other hearings with names. We've had 2 hearings, and Page Brook is still going. And after we approved it on December 8th, I think somebody from the community down there invited Abnaki input, so Page Brook is still working. And then the other thing I dislike is intentional inclusivity that was weaponized against our petition. And frankly, I know that young people use social media a lot more than geezers like me. I've seen enough about Facebook to know how polarizing it could be. But I want to echo what Kermit said. This thing should be bringing us together, not driving people apart. And I think the conversation could be valuable for the entire state of Vermont. I agree with that. Many of the members on this board handled the question of the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Book Award. We had 3 hearings. Most people in Vermont didn't even know that eugenics had occurred. We had extensive discussions. The state librarian at the time would get calls that he was a racist on one hand and calls that he was a misogynist on another. I don't know why people do this, but it was done, and it is hurtful. Our board made a decision not to pass judgment on Mrs. Fisher, but it was time to change the name, and we went through a process to do it. But this May, the legislature passed the resolution apologizing for eugenics. And I'd like to think that the fact that our board brought the attention to the people of Vermont and we got statewide coverage may have planted the seeds to bring about change 90 years after this state passed a sterilization law. It was a horrible period of our time, and I'm so proud of the legislature for bringing it up, and I'm so proud of the board for being willing to, we were called akin to a Kansas school board that was banning books, and then someone else said we were throwing a Gold Star mother under the bus because Mrs. Fisher's son was killed in battle or died in battle at a position during World War II. So I don't think that kind of stuff helps, and I had to say it. It bothers me. It bothers me. So I'm gonna turn it to the board. I don't know what we have to do. Procedure is.
Excuse me, could I be allowed to answer very quickly a question that Mr. Frank asked about history?
Yes, quickly.
30 seconds. He asked if James ever lived in town, and James did live in town for a short time. He was a lot older than his wife, so he died soon. And his name is not in any of the town records, according to Charlie Marchant. We've had conversations about this. Susanna's name was in the records, and she lived there for a much longer time. So just the answer.
Thank you. Okay, now.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the clarification on my question.
So I hand this to the board as to what you want to do. We would have to close the public hearing, first of all, if we're going to entertain another motion on approval or disapproval of the name, or yeah, I hope we make up our mind. So where are you?
I will move that we close the hearing on the renaming of Negro Brook.
Do we have a second? Debbie, I can't hear you. Are you seconding?
I will second for purposes of discussion.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Bruce, discussion, Bruce.
Oh,
She's
we have
second.
discussion. We have
She's second
discussion.
on the purpose of discussion.
Tom is my parliamentarian. I apologize for that. So let's go.
I made that motion on subject to purpose of discussion in case there was any discussion to be had by anybody. I don't have any discussion, but I just didn't know if anybody else did.
Okay, we're discussing the motion to close the public hearing. If there's no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, say no. Okay, the motion passes unanimously with me concurring. And now we're in a position where we can make a decision. I'd invite the board for a discussion and any motions.
This is Deb. I just like a confirmation. So the petition that is in front of us is to change the name to Susanna Toby. And did I hear somewhere along the line, Bruce, that you said that the petition cannot be withdrawn? Is that the Attorney General has ruled on that?
Jason,
I'm here. Okay, I will speak up. All right, so in talking with not the Attorney General directly, this is the AAG that we have counsel because the Department of Libraries resides under the agency administration. And talking with our counsel, the following can occur, and to withdraw a petition actually is a bit more technical. Once this has occurred, and this was one of the questions that the petitioners asked early on, and it was good to do, and why we had such interesting conversations, was to simply say, from council, once the petition is in motion, the board is obligated to do one of three things, but it cannot withdraw the petition. That would be up to petitioner, and I will discuss. The board can vote the petition up. The board can vote the petition down, which means starting over. If it goes up, federal government, then they make a decision, or the board can table. But again, the middle part of tabling just means you're extending it until you decide what you want to do. To officially withdraw the petition, the petitioners would then be required to connect with each person who has signed the petition. And if that number resides below the number acclimated for the petition, which is 25, the petition then did not meet the requirement of 25 appropriated signatures and then is withdrawn. So at this point, since the petition cannot be withdrawn, the board has three options. Table to continue, vote it up, vote it down.
Okay. So a decision needs to be made. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I'm just sighing. Just to speak on the matter, you know, I came into this saying, nah, but I think it would have been better for education, and I'll have to keep the name Negro Brook. But it seems the vast majority want to change it, so I will acquiesce to that. Susanna Toby, I like the changing to TOBE. I personally prefer Hussey, but if they didn't get married till later on, and we don't have any record of him ever living in Townsend, and we do have her, as long as there's some education that's used when people come to there and say, so why is it Susanna Toby Brook? You know, that would be, if the purpose of his education and including basically people of color in the line. By the way, my grandson's name is Toby, T-O-B-Y, his first name, and it's not short for Tobias. Yeah, so I would probably vote to approve at this time, and it's been going on too long. I can't vote because we don't have a motion.
Well, first of all, I want to say something too, because I've been so involved in this. This is very disturbing to me all the way around. I think we've bungled an opportunity to really have in-depth discussions. Part of that is the pandemic. Part of that is the pandemic. People couldn't get around. People get around. But in my heart of hearts, when I heard Jason tell me of his experience with Toby, and I just felt there was a dichotomy between favoring removing Hussey, but tolerating Toby. And based on his experience and what I did, I'm sorry. I feel that very strongly. I think we need to honor that. And if we don't pass the petition, I think it should start again. But I think it should start again differently. We can now have conversations. I hope we can put together this rancor and discord behind us, because if we can't, there's no hope for racial justice. So that's my feeling. And if somebody wants to make a motion, go right ahead.
Bruce Elise has a question, but I'm not sure if we're entertaining those at the moment.
Elise, you have a question? Okay. I'll wait because I know we have this awkward system.
Elise, you can talk now.
No, I just never took my hand down from the last time. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to put everyone's hands down. I think the public portion, as you said, Bruce, was over with. So
yeah. So here we are.
Can I just ask a clarifying question here? The petition says Susanna Toby. They would like to name it Susanna Toby Brook. If we decide that we don't want to name it Susanna Toby, but we would approve Susanna Hussey, then they have to start over again. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Though I would say if they did it over again, it wouldn't be a long process. They can simply do it, talk to the select board, and it could be at our next meeting, which is has to be 30 days. Right?
I think. Can I just say I think I definitely want to change the name from Negro Brook. I don't think that issue of education is sufficient because you put up a sign at the park, and that means that doesn't mean that anybody else in the state is ever going to see it or anywhere across the country. I think we need to change the name. I think that since the woman was known as Susanna Hussey for whatever it was, 60 years of her life, she was Susanna Toby for only until she was 18 or 20. I'm sorry, I don't, Elise, I apologize. I don't have the numbers in my head, but for a short period of time, the rest of the time she was known as Susanna Hussey, and also did the things that we are promoting her for, did those as Susanna Hussey and not as Susanna Toby. I would approve the Susanna Hussey name. I also have to say, though, that there may be some, I don't know. I don't know how important the local connection is. I understand that we don't necessarily have to follow the wishes of Townsend. But there are surely lots of other Black citizens, historical citizens of Vermont that deserve some credit as well. But given the petition before us, I would defeat the petition and ask them to come back with Susanna Hussey.
Maxie?
Or somebody else.
I would second.
Okay, so do I have a motion from?
I move that we.
Okay.
I move that we defeat the petition as stated, and that maybe with an explanatory comment that while we're in favor of changing the name from Negro Brook, we are not in favor of Susanna Toby.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I second.
Any discussion? Okay. Oh, I don't know.
Well,
that was James. Okay. James was also
James.
seconding.
Do we have any discussion about this?
And
I'd like to say, could I say one thing?
Sorry. Let me keep
Go ahead, James.
That's okay. One of the things that I've noticed, I think I said before that Vermont strikes me as a very independent-minded state. Sure, I've run into racists here in Vermont, but there's still also this independent streak that exists in Vermont. Something happened in the mid-19th century. If we apply one name to that book, we will be in essence erasing something that happened until it's actually found out what indeed did happen. I'm not above thinking that somebody may have killed somebody. I'm not, and I don't know who that was. I think I heard it said that one, at least we know, I think it was Mr. Blackwood, the black resident there, who said that at least we know that one person was there. Well, that's one perspective, but something else might have happened there too. I have no problem with labeling something in an ambiguous fashion if ambiguity is the closest thing we can get to truth. So that's what bothers me about applying just one name to it.
Okay.
At this
Thank
point.
you. Okay.
I would want to add one thing on that point, not as a counter. It was not needed, but the petitioners were told this at our initial meeting. One of the requirements, as we understand it by the department per the USGS and the USBGN, is about the scope. In other words, if there is plurality, the word Negroes is plural, and it might have meant that there was a group of people there, one of the things that you should not do is wipe away that reality. You should not go into a singularity. This is not to say that Susanna Tobey is not deserving, but going to one person, as James just discussed, is also a factor when history comes back to express itself.
Okay, do we have any other comments from the board? I don't think as chair I can call the question. So Deb, you're muted.
Sorry.
If there's
Could somebody
no,
read the motion?
Okay.
Pardon me?
I was just going to
Repeat
say,
the
Bruce,
motion.
If there's no additional comment, you can call it. Of course you can.
Okay, Deb asked for a restatement of the motion.
I was just asking for a restatement of the motion if I could hear it.
Linda?
Simply that we defeat the motion to call to rename the brook Susanna Tobey Brook.
Oh,
that's the motion.
okay.
I was just adding some, if we wanted to add some explanation, it would be, we're in favor of changing the name, but not to Susanna Tobey.
Okay, I'm going to call the question then. And all in favor of rejecting the petition signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, and I add my voice to the aye, that the petition is not accepted, and I'll have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
We adjourn. Yep.
Okay, and all in favor of adjourning? Saying
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, I want to thank everybody, and let's go on. Let's go upward. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Bruce.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much, Bruce.
Thank you.